A moment in some arguments that feels strangely quiet, not because the voices have softened, not because the conflict has been resolved, but because something invisible has already ended. You might still be speaking, you might still be explaining, defending, clarifying. Yet somewhere in the middle of the conversation, the other person has already left. They are sitting across from you. Their eyes still meet yours, but their presence has withdrawn. And sometimes the first signal of that withdrawal appears in a sentence so ordinary it almost passes unnoticed. Whatever you think, it doesn't matter anymore. Do what you want. On the surface, these phrases sound calm, almost reasonable, but beneath them lies something much deeper. Not resolution, not understanding, but resignation. A quiet psychological exit. And when someone reaches this point during an argument, the conflict is no longer about winning or losing. It is about something far more unsettling. It is about the moment a person stops believing the relationship itself still matters. Because long before people physically leave each other, they often leave psychologically first. Modern culture misunderstands conflict. We are taught that arguments are battles of logic, debates to be won with the right evidence, the right words, the right emotional intensity. Self-help advice often tells us to communicate better, express our needs, or stand our ground. But rarely do we talk about the deeper psychological event that occurs when someone stops participating emotionally. Because the real danger in relationships is not loud conflict, it is indifference. Anger still contains energy. Frustration still carries hope. But indifference signals something else entirely. It signals psychological disengagement. Our culture also glorifies endurance. We praise people who keep working, keep pushing, keep performing. Yet emotional life does not function like productivity. You cannot simply try harder to care once meaning has faded. This is why some relationships collapse in a way that feels mysterious. From the outside, nothing dramatic seems to happen. No betrayal, no catastrophe, just a slow accumulation of moments where one person stops feeling seen, stops feeling heard, stops believing their inner world still matters to the other. And eventually, the psyche protects itself in the only way it knows how, by withdrawing. The Swiss psychologist Carl Jung believed that human relationships are not just social arrangements, they are mirrors of the psyche. When we argue with someone we love, we are not only defending opinions, we are defending parts of our identity. The need to be understood, the need to matter, the need to feel psychologically real to another human being. Jung once suggested that the greatest human fear is not conflict, but invisibility. Because when someone consistently feels unseen, something inside begins to retreat. Another great thinker, Viktor Frankl, who survived the unimaginable suffering of concentration camps, discovered something similar. He observed that human beings can endure extraordinary hardship, but they cannot endure meaninglessness. When a relationship loses its sense of meaning, when dialogue becomes repetitive, dismissive, or emotionally hollow, the psyche eventually concludes that further investment is pointless. And when that realization arrives, people stop arguing not because peace has been achieved, but because hope has quietly died. The moment someone checks out during an argument rarely happens suddenly. It usually unfolds in stages. Each stage represents a deeper psychological shift. At the beginning, arguments are intense. Voices rise, words repeat, not because people enjoy conflict, but because they still believe they can be understood. This is the stage of emotional insistence. A person says the same thing again and again because they hope that eventually it will land differently. They hope the other person will finally see the pain behind their words. There is still energy here, still investment, still belief. In Jungian psychology, this stage reflects the ego's need for recognition. We want our internal experience to be acknowledged by another consciousness. When that happens, connection deepens. But when it repeatedly fails, something inside begins to shift. After many unresolved conflicts, the emotional tone changes. The person who once argued passionately becomes quieter, not calmer, just tired. The sentences become shorter, the explanations become fewer. Instead of expressing feelings, they start saying things like, forget it, it's fine, it doesn't matter. These phrases are often misunderstood. People hear them as agreement, but psychologically, they often mean something very different. They mean the person no longer believes the conversation will lead anywhere meaningful. The psyche, like the body, protects itself from repeated injury, and emotional exhaustion is one of its defense mechanisms. This is the stage where the most revealing sentences appear. Do whatever you want. You're right. I don't care anymore. On the surface, these phrases appear peaceful, but underneath them lies emotional absence. The person is no longer trying to repair the relationship dynamic. They are simply minimizing further pain. Jung described this as a form of psychic retreat. When the soul senses that its voice has no impact, it withdraws its energy. The conversation may continue, but the emotional presence has already left. And this is why some arguments feel strangely hollow. Both people are speaking, yet the relationship itself has stopped evolving. The final stage often occurs long before any visible breakup. It appears in everyday moments. Two people sitting at dinner with nothing meaningful to say. A shared house that feels strangely quiet. Conversations reduced to logistics, bills, schedules, obligations. Emotionally, the relationship has entered a state of coexistence rather than connection. And once the stage arrives, arguments rarely happen anymore. Not because harmony has been achieved, but because one person no longer believes the conflict is worth resolving. Imagine a simple scene. It is late evening. Two people sit across from each other at a kitchen table. The same argument they have had many times begins again. At first the voices rise, old frustrations resurface, but then something changes. One person sighs quietly and says, "You know what? It's fine. Do whatever you want." The room becomes still. The argument ends. Yet strangely, the silence feels heavier than the conflict ever did, because in that moment, something subtle has happened. A psychological door has closed. Another scene. A man lies awake late at night, staring at the ceiling while the house is silent. He remembers how conversations with his partner used to feel alive. There was curiosity, laughter, disagreement that somehow still carried warmth. Now every disagreement ends the same way. Short sentences, shrugged shoulders, and quiet withdrawal. And what disturbs him most is not anger. It is the absence of it. One more image. Years later, someone sits alone in a hospital waiting room. The fluorescent lights hum softly, and in the strange stillness of that place, a thought appears with painful clarity. The moment we stop truly listening to each other, that was the moment the relationship began to end. Not the final argument, not the separation, but the quieter moment when someone first stopped believing their voice mattered. As human beings grow older, a different awareness slowly emerges, the awareness of time, of finiteness, of how few conversations in life truly matter. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote that the deepest human desire is not comfort, but significance. We want our lives to mean something, and relationships are one of the primary places where that meaning is created. Every genuine conversation affirms something profound. Your inner world matters to me. But when that affirmation disappears repeatedly, the psyche eventually adapts. It lowers its expectations. It stops reaching. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the soul becomes quieter. This is why the phrases spoken during the final stages of an argument carry such weight. They are not just words. They are signals of existential fatigue. the quiet recognition that emotional effort no longer produces connection. And when people reach that point, the greatest tragedy is not that arguments happened. It is that understanding slowly stopped trying to exist. But there is an important truth hidden inside this uncomfortable realization. The moment you learn to recognize psychological withdrawal, you begin to understand the deeper language of relationships, not just the words people speak, but the energy behind them. You begin to see that conflict itself is not the enemy. In many ways, it is a sign of life. It means two inner worlds still care enough to collide. The real danger is when someone stops showing up emotionally, when conversation becomes mechanical, when phrases like "whatever you want" replace curiosity and presence. Because the health of a relationship is not measured by how rarely people argue. It is measured by whether both souls are still willing to remain psychologically present inside the argument, still willing to listen, still willing to be changed by what they hear. And when that willingness exists, even conflict can deepen connection. But when it disappears, silence begins to grow where understanding once lived. So the next time you find yourself in a difficult conversation, pay attention not only to the words being said, but to the life behind them, because relationships rarely collapse in dramatic moments. More often, they fade quietly, one small withdrawal at a time, until someone finally realizes